Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Talking about the big stories for today, let's start our conversation looking at some of the top stories, that's been trending since yesterday. The news about the decision by the UAE government to lift the ban on visas for Nigerians. It has been trending and Nigerians has been reacting in that direction. There was an agreement between the federal government and the United Arab Emirates as regards issuance of visas to Nigerians. That's good news. And for those of you thinking traveling to UAE to Dubai soon, the coast is clear. Let me find out from Shade. Do you intend traveling to UAE or Dubai?
Okay, so it costs like 668,000 naira, non-refundable, for the visa. I don't think I have that to travel for now.
No, you look like someone who could take
So, family,
interest in
let's get to the cruise of the matter. One of my issues with visas that are granted or not granted, and they are non-refundable fees. What do we do about that? What is the ambassador to the UAE going to do about that? What's the foreign affairs minister doing about that? Because at the end of the day, you don't expect somebody to pay that sum of money and he's not even sure if the visa is going to be granted.
When this kind of dispute happens,
Yes.
it's a diplomatic thing. But I think the starting point has to be an agreement, the fact that you've had an agreement between the UAE and the Nigerian government to start this kind of process. So
Yes.
that's the starting point.
Yes.
Every other thing will follow. You're aware that this controversy started like 2 years ago.
Yes.
Where Emirates Airlines couldn't repatriate some of its money. In fact, reports are showing that they are all, the central bank,
yes,
being owed about $85
hasn't
million.
paid us.
Yeah, but it started with the fact that they couldn't repatriate some of their funds.
Yes.
And some of these funds were trapped. And so as a result of that, that airline decided to suspend its services in Nigeria. And so when you have this kind of diplomatic row, it takes the intervention of the top heads of the two countries to meet together and find a striking point, which is exactly what has happened. Nigerians have been expecting that, okay, in the last 2 years, this will take place, but it happened yesterday, whereby there was an agreement between the two countries. And if you look at the kind of business relations that exist between Nigeria and Dubai, you know that that kind of agreement, it's something significant. A lot of Nigerians, they travel to Dubai for tourism, for business reasons, and then when it comes
some even live there.
Yeah, some people live there. I have friends.
So that means they're taxpayers.
Yeah, exactly. And because of the demand for some certain services, technology, and also the issue of tourism. So Nigerians see that place as a go-to. And that's why over the years that relationship has been there. So there's a need to strengthen that relationship. And this is why this is a good news, and I'm happy this is happening. So what it gives is opportunity for Nigerians to travel to Dubai, which has not happened in the last few years because of the diplomatic row. And when you have this kind of sensitive kind of controversy, it's also important that that's for the government to have, or people at the helm of government or helm of affairs to have what we call the political will to resolve this kind of crisis. You are aware that our president at a point traveled to UAE to have a meeting with the authorities there to see what can be done. That's what is necessary, because at this point, there's a need to open businesses, to open it up in Nigeria and even outside Nigeria for Nigerians to be able to travel in and also travel out of Nigeria to do businesses. And for me, I also think the issue of repatriated funds has also been handled by the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Yes.
Their backlog of all these funds, they've been paid. And it's also a lesson on our part to see what we can do to also improve our forex reserves, so that at least the CBN will be in position to do its responsibility. I'm also happy that we also have a local airline who is also doing good in that area. I don't want to mention it because I'm not being paid for adverts, So that competition is needed for us to also strengthen our local currencies, where the demand on foreign currencies will also help the growth of our local currency. For that particular airline, you don't need to pay foreign currency for you to be able to travel abroad and all that. So that's also an advantage. I also feel it's also necessary, like what you said, some of the critical issues that are not being handled as regards those who have paid earlier for visa and all that. I am very sure in coming days or in coming months that will be resolved, and that will become another important point of conversation between the two countries.
Yeah, one of my concerns is, they should have visa on arrival. for certain people, because you don't expect me, if I have an urgent meeting to have in Dubai, you don't expect me to start, go through the process of having to book for, appointment and all of that. They used to have that before, some years back. I can remember in 2002, all you needed to do, was, get there, and then you get your visa on arrival. And then again, another major concern is this. It seems like we are at their, at their
At their mercy?
Yes, at their mercy, because you just wake up one day and then you close your borders. Why? And then it took you 2 years. I think we need to sit up, the people in government who are in charge, of such relations, of such, international policies, that affects us. I think we need to push ourselves forward.
When
it's very important that
Yeah.
Nigeria sells itself. So we can't continue, to be a second citizen, as I call it, to other people where we pay taxes, not just little, heavy taxes. Because you have people, there was a report about the number of houses and the investment Nigerians have over there. It's crazy. The numbers are out of this world.
When it comes to business relations, that's what we call interest for
Yes.
each of the nations. And you would expect that each of the nations involved in that kind of deal will always protect their interest.
True.
So if Nigeria feels, okay, this is of interest to us, in any, whatever diplomatic relation you have, first thing that comes first is you always protect the interests of your nation. So if Dubai feels or UAE feels that certain decision has to be taken to protect their own interests, why not? They will do that. Which is why there's room for negotiation, there's room for conversation, for people to come together and have dialogue to see how they can resolve it. Don't also forget that the issue of visa on arrival is a global thing now,
Yes.
especially even in Africa. Rwanda started that. Some other African countries have also started that, because the ideal thing should be that Africa should be able to do businesses within itself. There should be no restrictions. Whereby it's easier for me to get to Ghana. When I get to Ghana, I do businesses, I do whatever I
Really,
do, without any restriction. The issue of trade barriers and these issues are being settled. So visa on arrival for Rwandans has been like a gain to them, because in recent times it has been the hub for tourists or tourism, because it makes it easier to process the issue of visa and getting to that country, makes it easier to attract more investors.
Yes.
For business reason, it's also important to think in that line. But I also feel the concern has to be the fact, the issue of data as regards Africa, the issue of insecurity and some other reasons, which for that thing has not
insecurity everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
But it's a necessity. If you look at the global trend as regards, migration, the necessity as regards business relationship. It's a necessity to have that kind of arrangement. But hopefully that will happen in Nigeria soon. So let's see what another big story has to do with the issue of inflation. Where there is hunger in the land. You saw the story.
There is
part of the story for the news update, where the federal government has decided to release greens.
20 trucks. Of rice
to 36 states in Nigeria. A lot of people are hungry. Whether we want to say it or not, it's a public secret that there is hunger in the land. People are hungry. And then, interestingly, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics released the latest figures yesterday as regards inflation for June, which is at 34.1%. There's this conversation between some experts saying that, okay, in reality, the inflation rate is more than that. In fact, there are some experts, I read some experts saying, okay, no, it's like 80%, it's like 90%, that the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is just trying to be conservative as regards the figure, not to raise any tension, and that there's no reality to the figure being released, that in true sense, the inflation is more, the headline inflation is more than 34.1%. But whatever it is, an average Nigerian knows that there's hunger in the land. There's something to do. But I think most importantly, we need to tackle the issue of inflation in Nigeria. We have to focus on local production.
How do we do that?
No, we have to focus more on local production. In recent times, the CBN has been doing more of monetary policies. But the truth is, globally, monetary policies, they are just like short-term interventions. They cannot last for years. But the CBN had to do that to tighten up the economy as regards lending rate and taking some sensitive decisions. In the last 4 months, or in the last 6 months, let's say that the first quarter that was done, the second quarter that was done, and now for the inflation, you discover that the inflation figure is even getting higher. It's not.
As long as there is insecurity in the land,
That's what I'm even talking
it
about.
would affect
Yeah.
production. Everybody says go local. We need local productions and all of that. But as long as there's insecurity, I can't go to my farm, to harvest my
Oh, really? You
rice.
have a farm?
I can go there.
That would be interesting if you have one.
You know,
Do you know it's also part of the conversation for you to grow what you eat, in your compound, in your house.
in for instance, in Lagos, you have everybody, with cemented floors and all of that. So
Yeah.
where do I get
You,
the
you can
sand,
look
the
for a
land,
piece of land around your area where, if you stay in
bags?
countryside like I do,
Okay.
so it's easier. I call it countryside, so it's easier like I do, because the idea is also to see how you can cut your cost in times like this. So if you can grow what you eat, like your vegetable and some other thing, it's also a plus. And but like you said, I agree with you. The issue of insecurity, especially in the Northeast, where farmers can't access their
They
farms,
cannot.
they can't go there. I even heard of a story where bandits were asking farmers to pay some amount of money, about
Protection fee.
20 million naira, in a particular story stating that last week, for farmers to be able to access their farm. So you discover that the effect of this,
And
the
then you have the
aftermath of
herders
this,
crisis as well,
yeah,
where,
that's stay there. So as long as all these things exist, the issue of tackling, the food
we have so many issues.
inflation might not be something that will easily abate. But what I will also say is there's this responsibility on the part of the CBN to see what they can do to also continue in the light of monetary policies, then also encourage manufacturers. Right now, no manufacturer can approach the bank if you look at the lending rates, because they need loans. These farmers, they need, especially those who are into mechanized farming, they need loans
But there are
to
so
do
many grants
businesses.
everywhere. They
Yeah,
should
the
access the
grant, but how
grants.
many of them can access these grants? The point I'm trying to make is, for farmers to be able to expand production and
Yes.
do well, they need funds to be able to achieve this. And if you look at the lending rate now, no farmer or manufacturer wants to approach any commercial bank for loan and all that, and it becomes difficult. So these are issues that the central bank needs to look into. Also, critically, you also need to look at the issue of inputs needed by farmers, fertilizers, seeds, the availability of these things to ensure that they engage in production. You agree with me that most of the farmers in Nigeria, they are peasant farmers, whereby they provide for themselves and their family. They are not really engaging in mechanized farming, and that's what should be encouraged.
You Stone Age tools, so of course,
and
production is low.
yeah. So the issue of mechanized farming should be encouraged, and for that to be achieved, there's a need to provide equipment for them. The cost of getting a tractor now, even the spare parts are not readily available. Even if they are available, they are not that
The
cheap.
technical know-how.
Looking
Yes.
at the cost, also in sourcing for the spare parts, you also need forex, because these things are not produced locally.
True.
You don't have local sources.
So why can't we produce them here?
Well, you are aware of, I don't want to mention that you're a particular auto manufacturer somewhere in the East who is
Yes.
something similar.
Okay.
So that's a sign to show it's possible. In the past, we've had things like that in Nigeria. But the cost of doing business in Nigeria has made a lot of them to, exit. You are aware of the exit of multinational companies in recent times in Nigeria due to the cost of operation, cost of doing business, the business environment, and inability to access forests. These are factors that need to be tackled. It's not just about saying, okay, these things need to exist in Nigeria, but the business environment also needs to be friendly. The issue of taxation.
Another thing is, I think that we are too dependent on some certain states for certain produce. Why do we have to wait for tomatoes, for instance, to come all the way from Kano or Kaduna before we can access tomatoes? Because the thing is this, if there's no tomatoes coming in from Kano, we don't have here in the West. Why is that so? We have Ogun State, you have Edo State, you have I don't want to call Abuja. Abuja is still part of the North. You have several states, Akwa Ibom and all of those places where they can produce these things and then can get to us. So if for instance, you have violence, you have insecurity in Kaduna, they're trying to tackle that. We don't need to wait for them, because it means that if there's no produce from Kaduna or Kanu, it means that we're going to go hungry in the West, and it's not supposed to be so.
I agree with you. It's a valid point. The bulk of the we consume here in Lagos comes from Abuja, or comes from the north.
The North, yes.
And so if that happens, that means the cost you're paying for when it comes to the issue of logistics and transport, that will add to the cost of the year. For someone who's into business, you're into business to make gains. If, for instance, I have spent or I was able to acquire the year at the rate of, let's say, 1,000 naira per tuber.
And they actually incur losses because
yes,
they use
because
open trucks.
it will even add to the
They use
cost of
open
the
trucks. It's not
product
supposed to be so.
of
Your
the
storage trucks where you
commodities.
can, see, we have universities, we have agricultural universities where the information on these issues are there. They know, they have the knowledge on how we can, go through. For me personally, these are little problems. You can't tell me there is nobody in Nigeria that doesn't have the know-how of how we can preserve tomatoes coming in from Kaduna or Kano to Lagos without it getting spoiled. Because if you, for instance, if you paid probably say 2 million for a truck, and because of logistics and all of that, it's to spend like 7 days on the road. It gets to Lagos, half of your produce is spoiled. How do you recoup? What does this mean? You need to put the pricing of the other ones that you're going to sell. It has to increase, and that's a problem.
And so it means the consumers will also pay more. I think, like, I agree with you. What's important is for states to see how they can collaborate.
Exactly.
For instance, you have Lagos State collaborating with Kaduna State. I remember at the point Lagos State had a collaboration with Kebbi State as regards the production of rice and some others. I don't know if they still do that, but that can happen because there are certain products or commodities that do well in certain area because of the climatic condition.
Okay.
Which you might not have that in Lagos. But I also feel there's a need for Lagos to collaborate with neighboring states like Ogun State, who have the land mass. Lagos might not be naturally blessed.
You have graduates that that can be empowered.
Land mass,
go into farming.
Ogun State, yeah. So it's a conversation that that needs to be ongoing. And needs to be had, and I think is ongoing. All right, let's just wrap up these top stories, and then we'll look at a major big story for today. All right. Shadi, I must confess you're doing well.
Thank you very much.
This is Early Exchange, where we talk about the big stories. And our conversation today will center around the green minerals, the concept of green minerals. We're going to look at the geopolitics and also the prospect inherent in this kind of special minerals. The transition to green energy also increased the demand for some of these minerals. You have lithium, you have copper, and the rest of them. And interestingly, Africa is blessed when it comes to these resources. Now, the conversation has to be around the geopolitics, the political tension that has to deal with the distribution of these green minerals. For some countries are more blessed than the other when it comes to the distribution and the data as regards these minerals. Some countries have it in abundance. A good example is Africa as a continent has it in abundance. But that has also led to some geopolitical tension. What are the prospects in these businesses? And the conversation is, what should be the narrative globally to be able to tap the advantage and the potential provided by this green minerals? Shortly, we're going to have a guest, Shadi, talking about these the concept. Now, the idea is to ensure that if you look at the distribution of these green minerals, from one continent to the other, from one country to the other, certain countries are blessed or naturally have it in abundance more than the other. And so as a result of that, that has caused some geopolitical politics.
Even cartels.
Cartels here. Now, you're aware of the disruption brought by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the disruption it has brought to the global food supply chain. So it's also of conversation, which is why the European Central Bank is bringing up this conversation around green minerals to ensure that, taking a reference from what happened, to the global energy sector as regards the invasion of Ukraine, it's also important for nations to sit together to address the issue of geopolitical tension that may arise with the abundance or utilization of green minerals. And if you look at some of these minerals, they are very sensitive in the production of, some of these sensitive materials are being used in the production of electric vehicles.
Yes, batteries as well.
Batteries, and, interestingly, I was in Ekiti, that was 2 weeks ago, and I learned there was a particular person who discovered lithium in abundance at a particular place in a region somewhere around the Kole in Ekiti. And so you have it, it's like a stretch. If you have it in a particular area, trust me, miles away from that, you can still have them in abundance. So when it comes to that, the deposits of these natural resources, you have more of that in Africa. But the question is, why Africa has not been able to take advantage of these resources? If you have it in abundance, talk about copper, talk about, lithium, we have, but it has not been commercialized in a way that it translates to, proper returns
I
and
think
gains.
it's because we have more politicians.
I also,
That's because we have more politicians than people who are really into governance, the business of governance. We have the state governors. If you're a state governor, you should understand what your state has. You should know what it has. And then if you think that people within you do not have the knowledge to deliberate on how to go about it, what do? You bring in foreign experts. It is easy. We can't keep kowtowing to the West. We can't wait for every time we sit back and we want somebody else to come and teach us how to use our minerals and what to do with our minerals. That way we get cheated, because if you're going to bring somebody, an expert from a foreign country, so definitely he's going to, want to take probably 50 or 60% of everything, because you do not even know what you have.
In Africa, majorly, I think the challenge is not the absence of laws. There are certain laws as regards regulation of some of these minerals, what you need to do. You're aware of what is happening in Zamfara now, as regards that island. It's likely because some people have turned themselves to, cartel, and then because they have some gains coming from that, they've not been able to,
they mine at will, you do whatever you want.
And that's why it's also important for government to sit up with the responsibility of also regulating.
They need to, actually.
So it's not the absence of law, it's just the implementation. You have laws guiding the issue of mining and some of these resources.
Who is going to implement it when sometimes we hear that the people behind the implementation, who are supposed to be behind the implementation, are actually involved.
Yeah, that could
in the crime. Do I call it a crime?
That could happen, but it's also important to set a narrative. At the state level, you have the instrument of the state. I'm happy the minister is also, coming up with something about special marshal for that sector, to be like the police for that sector, to ensure that they do what we call local policing of those sensitive areas. So it's about the political will. You always have collaborators in-house or even within the communities who are also housing those people. In fact, you could also have the possibility of even have some of these locals who have also engaged in that. I'm being careful with my choice of words because evidence has not shown, but it's a known fact that for that to exist in that particular community, there must be collaboration between some natives or some locals in that area.
If you do recall that there were 2 foreigners who were arrested, and they mentioned the names of the locals who had assisted them, in going about telling them where these resources were, and they had a sharing formula. So, like you said, I agree with you that you usually have somebody in-house who is selling us out, and we shouldn't take that.
Our conversation is around the concept of green minerals, looking at the geopolitics and also the business impact, not just in Africa, but globally, as the conversation around the transition to green energy has also necessitated the need to look at the concept of green minerals. We've been joined by our own to strengthen and also shed more light on this conversation. We have SOUQ Orovwuje joining us this morning. Glad you have joined us this morning.
Good morning, friend. A pleasure to be here.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mr. Sam.
Good morning.
I love that. Looking smart as usual.
Thank you very much.
So let's look at the concept of green minerals. It's not a new thing, but in recent time, the European Central Bank is raising the attention on the need to address the issue of the geopolitics that may arise from this. You're aware of what happened with the destruction in global energy and the supply chain as regards some tension in some area and the other. Now, why do you think it's important to focus on the geopolitics that could arise as a result of this distribution of green minerals globally?
Thank you very much indeed. Based on the concept of energy transitioning, the world is moving into a green economy, which is like a renewable energy ecosystem that is supported essentially by certain minerals that enhances the green economy. You're talking about lithium, copper, and the likes, which are going to shape the conversation in terms of energy transitioning between 2040. The European Bank recently is focusing on the possibility or the challenge that we're likely to see based on the distribution of what you call green minerals, which are domiciled in the global south, or what you call the developing country. The challenge here is that geopolitical fragmentation as a result of the interplay of the big power in the international system, we disrupt the process in terms of the supply chain and the consumer metrics. So the point here is that for us to be able to transit between now and 2040, there's a need to address the critical issues of geopolitics, political fragmentation, particularly the issue between Russia and Europe, China and US on the other hand. Regrettably, some of these critical minerals that you call green minerals are deposited in Africa. To what extent can we align globally to be able to take advantage of this green mineral and the politics that comes out of that? So the challenge is, what are the disruptions likely to take place in terms of supply, in terms of the consumer? So you look at the two extremes, the consumer on the one hand, look at the supplier on the other hand, and look at the political alignment, realignment, and the fragmentation that currently take place. To what extent can we navigate those processes? Maybe as the conversation progresses, be able to look at specific issues.
Okay, China has strategically positioned itself, in the green supply chain, becoming the single largest possession of nickel, copper, lithium, and cobalt. What do you have to say about that?
I think that's a welcome development. I think that's one of the reasons when we talk about geopolitical fragmentation. I think the US has always been worried about the growing popularity of China in the international market space. So China is well positioned. Europe, on the other hand, is struggling to see how they can re-engineer themselves, particularly with the US, and see how they can play globally. But China remains a dominant factor in terms of green mineral. If you look at the new initiative from the perspective of the BRICS nation, where China is a major player, and see how they want to see the dollar is not used as an international measurement of international trade. So these are some of the geopolitical tension, fragmentation that the European Bank is worried about. But China will continue to play a dominant role, even in Africa, in terms of the exploitation of these green minerals. But Africa must position herself to take advantage because we lost out originally from the other primary commodity that we've been shipping out, where it essentially take advantage of Africa. So with this new initiative in terms of green mineral, we have lithium in Nigeria, for example. So if China wants to take mineral deposits, they should come and invest here rather than just taking the primary commodity away. So those are some of those tensions that we need to resolve.
Now let's address the dominance of some few countries. Shadio talked about the impact being made by China, and this has been of concern to stakeholders, critical stakeholders. Now, how do we address this dominance? It's also a natural thing that certain nations are more blessed than the other because it's a gift of nature, if I may put it that way. But how do we address this dominance in order to avoid what we call potential vulnerability that may exist and the disruption that may exist between the producer, the suppliers, and then the end users of these minerals?
I think what is important is that a country must look at their strategic interests vis-a-vis the interests of those bigger nations that are at play in terms of exploitation of green minerals. So in particular, Africa must look to China in terms of the kind of development model on these new ecosystems of green minerals. To what extent, rather than just exploiting these minerals, taking them out to process them and bring them back to us, the conversation should be that for those bigger nations that want to take advantage of these green minerals, should make strategic investments here in Africa, and African leaders must look towards where their interests will be sustained in a manner that is beneficial to their citizens. In that regard, therefore, what this new geopolitical alignment, I think there's no permanent friend, rather there's permanent interest. So African nations should focus more where they can benefit in terms of green mineral resource, rather than the disadvantage that we had in the past, particularly with their colonial masters, who just took primary products away, refine them, and bring them back to us. Rather, this new initiative should talk about more of investment in extractive industry. Some of those companies must be domiciled in Africa, particularly for lithium, copper, and cobalt, which are the essential elements of this green mineral.
So what does the role of research have to play, to research substitute materials, the green minerals, so that we don't depend on this, not so much of a dependency of the minerals, of the resources?
No, the dependency theories will continue to be there for some time, but if you look essentially about dependency in terms of the West and the global South, that may not necessarily improve on development. So the development language currently is to what extent can you take advantage of your resource endowment, what you call factor endowment, to the extent that it becomes very beneficial. So if you go into a negotiation table, you come in with a win-win situation mentality that we have this mineral resource. Therefore, we expect XYZ in terms of investment in our environment so that we can take advantage. So we cannot continually begin to bury ourselves on this dependency theory that the West is always coming here to take our minerals away. I think that language has been on for over 70 years. I think we should, the conversation is to what extent can we strategically benefit to this resource endowment driven by research. We have, in terms of negotiation, you come into the table, you negotiate at the level of a win-win situation, a 50-50, rather than where they just give you a contract to sign, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really benefit your citizen.
Now, before we address how Africa can maximize the gains from these materials, lithium, cobalt, and the rest of them, let's identify why it has been challenging over the years for Africa to take advantage of this. A good reference is that of DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, who has a large reserves of cobalt, about 70%, as regards the global share. Even copper. But that has not translated to better gains for DRC, for instance. Not to talk of other African countries. You have Nigeria, lithium. We also have it here in Nigeria. So drawing a reference from that, why do you think it has been challenging for Africa to take advantage of this, like what China is doing with electric vehicles, with the use of lithium and all that? Why has it been so difficult?
I think the political economy of Africa has been challenging. Number one, the colonial fragmentation, which is part of the geopolitical element that we're talking about. Number three, African leaders have failed to remove the lessons of colonialism to the extent that they don't really even believe that we have a solution. They always look towards Beijing, Washington, and possibly London for development solution. I think we need to drop that cap currently so that we can strategically. Number two, there's a relationship between conflict and mineral resource endowment. There are research that shows that some Western countries have brought about disruption by creating rebel groups within where minerals resources are situated in order to take advantage of that environment. Therefore, African leadership must continually pursue good governance in order to eliminate these kidnappers, banditries, and rebels that disrupt processes where minerals are situated. Number two, countries must find a way to put an ecosystem in terms of regulatory framework that support minerals exploitation, particularly taking care of the host community to reduce the influence of external collaborators that disrupt the system.
You talked about geopolitical fragmentation, which might disrupt, the green transition. What can be done?
The fragmentation will continually be there. What is important is how do you navigate this tension, this fragmentation, in order to pursue your strategic interests so that your citizens benefit. The world has been configured in a way the balance of power and the balance of terror will continually be in the international system. But what is important, particularly for the global south, where we belong, leaders must find a way to navigate these tensions to benefit their citizens. So the issues of non-alignment as principles in the early independent movement periods are no longer sustainable. Where does your strategic interest lies as a country? So you find a way to navigate those tensions so that you can take the economic advantage and draw strategic relationship with countries that can become beneficial to your own development agenda. And that's why, in my view, the relationship between Africa, in spite of some of the negative narrative in the public domain, China remains a very dominant factor in terms of African development, where a kind of resource exchange is done for development to take place. Unlike the West that give us loans, and those loans end up in boardrooms where people take teas and spend those monies in hotels, and it doesn't benefit the citizens. But in terms of China, we have some criticism of some of the aspects of their businesses, but in the last 20 years, in terms of impactful development, China has done well in Africa. So to answer your question simply, is that we must know how to navigate the tension in the global space to the benefit of citizens in Africa.
Now, if you look at the scrambling for these resources, these mineral resources, it has also positioned Africa as the bride now, the toast of all now, for countries like the US, China, other European countries. Africa, because of the natural abundance of these minerals, is becoming the latest bride, which has also been. Now, how do you think Africa can take advantage of this potential, to maximize gains? What kind of collaboration should exist, for instance, between African countries and the big players who have been attracted to Africa because of these minerals? You have the US and China. What kind of collaboration should exist in this regard?
Thank you very much, Femi. I think Africa has always been a beautiful bride. The point is that we need to re-engineer the leadership processes in a way that we don't see the global north as a superior partner in whatever we do. So the strategic partnership that we were talking about a little while ago must be sustained in a way that when African leaders come to the table for negotiation, particularly in the area of mineral resource endowment or factor endowment, they must come with superior argument in terms of to what extent can investment be sustained in this area, rather than the focus on exploitation of this primary commodity. You take them away. Rather, there should be technology transfer. There should be investment in terms of reinvestment in Africa. So let's take lithium, for example. A greater percentage of that mineral is used for the development of batteries. So why will you take the raw material away from Africa? You process the battery, you bring them back here at an expensive rate, and be looking for foreign exchange to support. Therefore, any agreement or strategic partnership that will sustain our relationship with any particular country that want to exploit our mineral is, number one, we have this resource. Bring your plant, transfer your technology. The government, on the other hand, must find a way to provide some tax incentive for those companies so that they can bring their equipment to situate their factories here in Africa. There must be some capacity development program where technology can be transferred. The certain management position at the top must be shared between the respective country and those countries that are coming to invest. If we're able to do this continually, then there will be uhuru at the end of the day. But mind you, African government too must provide a safe haven in terms of providing security, good governance, so that these companies can thrive and we can earn reasonable foreign exchange by exporting some of these final products rather than just pushing our primary commodity into the market space.
Now let's look at the environmental and the social impact of mining of some of these resources. From experience, if you take a reference from what is happening in Zamfara now, you realize that the presence of these minerals will also attract some of the challenges that has to do with environmental issues and social issues. And the ideal thing is, before citing some of these factories, they do what we'll call environmental impact assessment. But you observe that most of the time they ignore it. So what should be done to ensure that the impact on the environmental status and even the social status, also, especially the host communities of these materials, are also being taken care of, to ensure that you have proper standard of living and the welfare of people hosting these resources are also put into consideration? Then also the issue of the environmental assessment, the report, the implementation of it, whose responsibility should it be? And then how can we improve on that?
Thank you, Femi. I think the challenge here has to do with corruption. The point here is that we have a regulatory framework, a policy framework that supports environmental impact assessment, business sustainability, which is part of the ecosystem for every business that exploits mineral resource. But the challenge here, those who have responsibility to execute some of these policies, after collecting money, they look the other way. So the point here is that the regulatory framework, we have the PIA, which is taking cognizance of host community, environmental impact assessment, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, tied together in a way that we don't just come to have a kind of a policy statement that you are corporate socially responsible. Rather, the citizen has a place here to say, wait a minute, company A, this is exactly what we want in line with what you are producing within our community. This is what you are supposed to pay us. On the other hand, too, there's a demand, a global best practices that companies must expose themselves to in terms of environmental impact assessment. Once these frameworks are respected, then government officials that have responsibility for control mechanism must be up and doing. And when they are infraction, then the regulatory framework and the penalty and sanction must be served to those companies to serve as deterrent to some other company that will not respect that. But those frameworks at local level, at the federal, we have them, even at the regional and at the global level. So players must respect the best practices put in place in terms of good manufacturer practices and good environmental practices that are imbued into their business plan.
How do we encourage private investment in mineral extraction and refining if politically the area is not stable?
Most of the exploitations are done by private companies. And a little while ago, when this conversation was on, I mentioned that the environment in terms of security, the security sector reform must be put in place to be able to sustain production, extraction, enhance national productivity. So on the political side, the government must put necessary infrastructure in place in terms of how security can be sustained in order to enhance business. The ease of doing business principles must equally be sustained to enhance investment in those areas. But currently, the environment is very difficult, but then it's government responsibility to provide security and welfare to our citizens.
All right, let's wrap up with this question. The demand for green minerals is rising due to the transition to the green economy and all that, and is expected to increase fivefold by the year 2050. How can Nigeria key into this? What are the critical steps you expect the Nigerian government to take in order to be able to maximize, the increase as regards the demand for these resources?
For me, my advice would be why the globe or not is pushing us into the green economy revolution. We must be mindful of the fact that while there's a need for transitioning into the green economy, we must not shy away from investment in those traditional mineral economy, because China, United States of America, even Germany, they are still burning coal to provide power for their citizens. So therefore, those traditional minerals that we have here, we must not look away from those. And I want the government to equally exploit some of those old minerals while pursuing the transition to green economy, because there's some of international conspiracy in this regard. China is burning coal at a higher level to power energy for their citizens. But they are pushing us very hard with the Paris Agreement to transit quickly and to meet up with the 2040 target in terms of how we can deliver on the green economy. But the idea is that we must strike a balance. The green revolution is okay. We need investment. For the West too, with the promise they made at the Paris Agreement, supported by the one in UAE, Dubai recently, they must live up to those promises in terms of climate financing to enhance the green economy, so that the international conspiracy does not take us off guard. We need to have a balance in terms of decision making to transit to a green economy.
The need to have a balance when it comes to the transition to green economy. What a way to wrap up this conversation. Sam Orovwuje, we must thank you for your time.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
your
Sam.
brilliant thoughts on this conversation. Let's hope that the Nigerian government will be able to take advantage of this window. It has increased the demand for these minerals fivefold.
I think the media has a greater responsibility in terms of pushing the agenda.
Interestingly, that's why
Thank
we're
you
having
very
this conversation. Our agenda is to shape policy. That's why we're bringing this on the table for the stakeholders who are involved in this to do what is needful. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sam.
Pleasure.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.